The over-application of minerals is really a sales gimmick per se, in my opinion. What we're trying to do is work with the system as it's designed rather than trying to redesign the system.
Yeah, my name is Jim Halbeisen, and this is my opinion.
My name is Jim Halbeisen. Welcome to the Growers Podcast. I have a guest today, Chris Kohls, and we're going to discuss the bridge that fell down in Baltimore.
Recently, I wrote an article, Jim, titled "All Fertilizers Toxic, Aren't They?" And, I wrote this article because when I first started at Growers, I went on their website and, was reviewing the product and looking at it and realized that it is FDA approved for or registered for animal consumption. And I thought that was amazing. I was always taught, from my grandfather who grew up on a farm that stay away from the fertilizer, keep the animals away from the fertilizer, kind of like gasolines, so you never wanted to have animals take it, let alone anybody else. But, the reason why I wrote this article is not only to question why is fertilizer or most fertilizers toxic, but we also had a scenario a couple of years ago. Everybody's heard about the bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge that recently had a disaster happen to it, and basically a big cargo ship hit it and tore down the bridge. Well, a few years ago, about 20 years ago, that causes a lot of problems, by the way. People don't realize that you can't have toxic material through tunnels on the East Coast because of the hazardness of the toxic chemicals. So they don't allow you to go through the tunnels up there when you do have that toxic waste. So when a bridge goes out, it causes a lot of problems for moving fertilizers around and other toxic materials. And about 20 years ago, they had a bridge that was shut down for whatever reason. I forget what the reason was, but we had to get our, growers minerals delivered. And our truck driver up there working for Dennis Grove, our district manager up there, Doug Malpauls, was delivering some growers. And the only way to get across the bay was through the tunnel. So he decided, I'm going through the tunnel. And of course, they stopped him when he tried to get through the tunnel. And first officer literally said, "You cannot go through the tunnel. I know you're carrying fertilizer. I grew up on a farm. I know fertilizer is toxic, and you can't bring any toxic materials through the tunnel." Well, Doug knew growers was not a toxic fertilizer and trying to convince the officer, but the officer knew better because he was a farmer. Finally, they called in the captain, and the captain came down and went through Doug explaining what growers was, and the captain was hearing from his subordinate that said, it's toxic. And finally, Doug was frustrated and just said, "Hey, listen, I'll prove it to you." So he literally climbed up on the back of the tanker, opened up the tanker drawer and stuck his hand in there and licked a little bit of growers. And stunned, I think the captain looked at him at that point and said, "Hey, this guy's willing to lick growers mineral. It must not be toxic. Let him through." So writing that article, Jim, can you tell me why most toxics or most fertilizers are toxic, and what's the difference between most fertilizers and growers mineral?
Yeah, Chris, the thing with fertility products, basically this goes back to World War II when they figured out how to take nitrogen out of the air, and then they were trying to refine ground rock materials, and that covers the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium issues that supposedly are necessary in fertilizer. And what they have promoted is that it takes a certain amount of volume of those elements to get a certain amount of production. And what they're trying to do is bypass the way the system is really designed. The system is designed for the microbiological life in the soil to feed the plant. And see, they're trying to bypass that step in the process. And while they're doing that, they're trying to, since it's inefficient, they are trying to cut the expense of the mineral that they're using. And so what has evolved from that is that fertilizer companies are using toxic products because that allows them to cut their expense quite significantly. Some products that are used in fertilizer actually belong in toxic landfills, which is very expensive. And so rather than the expense of putting these compounds into toxic landfills, they're just putting it into fertilizer and trying to dilute it out enough so that you don't see any damage. But what we're seeing is biological populations are starting to become imbalanced from the use of these products. And see, in the beginning, Dr. Victor Tegens was trying to feed the biological life that actually feeds the plant. Well, he had to make it non-toxic in order for the microbes to consume it without any damage or imbalances that would be done in the system. See, a lot of people can't understand that when you put toxic materials into the soil, Mother Nature will clean that toxicity up, but she does it with biological populations that aren't very good at feeding the crop. So you start to imbalance that system. And once you do that, then it just requires more input and more input at that point. Well, they're on a treadmill at that point. They have to cut the cost because the volumes that they're putting in there are very, very large. So that's what's evolved as far as fertility products are concerned. They have a certain amount of toxicity that are associated with them. They're toxic to the biological life in the soil, and they're toxic to the biological life in animals, which would include humans. So again, that accumulation can be a problem. And some farmers said, well, geez, you could never eat fertilizer. Well, we are registered as a phosphorus supplement. Farmers are feeding it directly to livestock. The registration is for ruminant animals. And we've been doing that. That was done in the beginning. Then in the early to mid 90s, we registered it for ruminant animals with all the various states. And we go through an FDA inspection in order to ensure that we're using proper methodologies. But the product is very safe in that regard. And see, that connotates the idea that, you've got the snake oil product there. You fertilize with it, you drink it. And again, but that's not snake oil. That's basic science, because we're trying to feed the biological life in the soil that's actually feeding the plant. And for those of you that are interested in that, there's a term called rhizophagy, which is pretty well accepted in the biological world now as the way plants are designed to grow. And again, that relates strictly to the microbes that associate with the crop itself. And cover cropping, no-tilling is focusing on that today. And we focused on it from the fertility standpoint from the beginning. Victor Tegens realized that the amount of fertility that you need is very minimal because the crop itself is 96% carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So it doesn't take a lot of mineral to accomplish it. And using a higher grade material, you're putting it in the chain that will actually feed the plant and do it very efficiently.
So really, growers is feeding both the plant and the microbes at the same time.
Yes, that's correct. And see, as far as it being registered as a livestock feed, it's basically the same thing. You're feeding the microbes of the immune system. When you talk about a ruminant animal, everybody understands that it's biological life, bacteria, fungi that's in the rumen of a ruminant animal, and you're fertilizing them. You're also fertilizing the microbes that are in the digestive tract, in the intestines. Actually, that is right now a very big portion of human medicine is improving the immune system of the animal. And as a company, we believe the mineral balance that we have and the purity of the balance, we're able to feed that and invigorate the immune system of the animal. And so you would be doing the same thing with the microbes that are feeding the plant.
So really, you have to start with good raw materials, non-toxic raw materials.
In other words, the balance, when you start looking at fertilizing soil, you have to start and look at the populations that are actually necessary to feed the crop. And see, they require a certain amount of purity, a certain amount of balance, a certain amount of volume. And see, that's what we're trying to do, is hit that button to make them as efficient as possible, so their ability to feed the crop. The crop is feeding the microbe sugar through the photosynthetic activity, and then that sugar is invigorating those microbes. And in return for the sugar, they feed the crop minerals. And see, you get a synergy there. It's called a symbiotic relationship between the plant and the microbes, and the efficiency of that is very, very high. That's really the way the system is designed. The over application of minerals is really a sales gimmick per se, in my opinion. What we're trying to do is work with the system as it's designed, rather than trying to redesign the system.
Makes a lot of sense. And our manufacturing process is very unique in the industry.
Yeah, that's
can you
right.
Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, we do what's called a hot mix. What we try to do is get the solution warm enough that you get a chemical interaction. You get molecular agitation within the solution, so that the minerals are solubilized into the water molecule to make a true solution. So many of your fertility products are just suspensions. They've been agitated very significantly and, minimized so that they will stay in that suspension, but they're not really soluble. They will eventually fall out. And a lot of farmers find that out when they have different mixtures that they segregate in the field if they don't get them utilized correctly. And see, when you make a true solution through that agitation of the water and of the minerals themselves in hot mixing, now you've got a true solution, and that can stay in that balance and that ratio for a very long time. We've actually found growers' products that had been manufactured 40 years prior to the discovery of the product, and you'd see a few crystals. That comes from dehydration of the product because we're fairly concentrated, but the overall base was still soluble in the water. It was a little higher concentration because of the water evaporating, but your concentration is still in balance, and it's still the same product. And most people don't believe that that's necessary. Again, it's a cost factor. They're selling products at a lower cost, and so their input of manufacturing is much lower. And see, we're saying the efficiency of our product, the balance of our product, the purity of the product is something that makes it very desirable within the system as it's designed.
And you really have to have a smart guy operating or running this manufacturing facility, just because it is a dangerous process when you start.
No, the training is a very big thing. I think that's the growers' organization, I think from the beginning realized that this is something it's necessary, but it's something that has to have safety to it. I think safety meetings, the start of the company was 55. They knew all about safety meetings back then, long before that was even part of the protocol in standardized business today. But that's very, very critical in order to get the product in balance. And when you heat it to the kind of temperatures that we do, when you're working with nitrogen, that can be dangerous. So again, training is a big issue. And so, again, that's a cost factor because, again, when you pay for training, that goes into the cost of the product. But we think it's very necessary in order to give us the true solution that, our advocation to farmers is, well, you run into a little trouble this year. You don't get planted what you want planted. You bought a little bit more growers than you needed. It's fine. You can use it next year. You could probably use it 5 years from now or 30 years from now. See, so again, that's a very special or unique thing about the product.
And you have a little bit of history with the product, I understand, in your family farm.
Yeah. No, we use it in our operation. Dad started with the company in the beginning in 55. We've got fields that have been planted with the grower's product as a starter and as a foliar product, from 55. So again, we've got a track record with it, and our success rate is fine. We're very competitive. So, and You know, we have guys that when they first hear about us, they're a little suspicious, and a lot of them want to take a look at other guys' farms. And we have that all over the country, basically, guys that have been with us for long periods of time because it's created success in their farm and they feel that they're doing the right thing, which is also a big part of being within the growers organization.
Yeah, I must say, you know, we're in upwards of 35 states and a couple provinces in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, one of the real satisfactions in my travels around the country is going around and seeing growers, guys that have been on the program for, 30, 40, 50, some of them upwards of, like you, 70 years, mm-hmm. and seeing the success that growers has brought them. I've heard story after story where struggling farmer, was going backwards, his yields were going down, his profitability was almost nothing, and changes and gets on the growers program and turns that around. And I think it's truly believing it's investing in your land when you use growers versus taking away from the land. Yep. Using some toxic stuff.
Well, the Growers Network, we feel that's a selling point for us. When you're in that many states and a couple provinces in Canada, we make a lot of contacts. Guys do different things. They grow different crops. They do it different ways. That's part of the selling point of growers, in my opinion. You embrace the network at that point. And we have guys that interact with each other, and they're not talking fertility whatsoever. They want to talk about a new type of harvesting mechanism they got, or they got a new planter, or they got something that nobody else has used before. And there might be somebody else within the network that's got some experience with that. And we think that's a very, very important issue because, again, within the network, you're talking to other guys that are conducting business. The idea that you're going to use taxpayer-funded people that are promoting things, that can be a start, but it's got to be profitable. And see, the guys you interact with in our network, they've been up to something trying to make a business work for them. So we feel it's very good information that is very helpful to guys.
Yeah, that network is something unique to growers. And it's just not our sales force, which are primarily farmers first,
right?
But also our customers. I was on the phone today with one of my district managers down in Georgia. He's just having a terrible season, lost his strawberries to a disease, and now has tomato issues. Mm-hmm. And first thing I told him is, hey, you got to call Bruce Stevens in Ohio. He's dealing with tomato issues right now, and he may be able to assist you with that. And he was thrilled about that. And then we have another guy, Kevin Racky, that can help with that as well. So it was a neat, just satisfaction from actually one of my district managers trying to find another resource through our networks and finding out information.
Yeah, no, that, and when you've got another farmer that you're talking to, that's very helpful. Even if it doesn't give you a total solution, you get a lot of different ideas and you look at things differently and see when you get that different set of eyes in somebody that's actually tried something. That's very, very helpful. Very helpful.
This podcast has been brought to you by Growers Mineral. Please visit growersmineral.com.